The studio did not look dramatic. That was the first thing Meghan noticed. No bright lights, no polished stage, no audience waiting for cues, just a low ceiling, dark walls, and a table that looked heavier than it needed to be. The kind of room where sound mattered more than image, where words stayed in the air longer than people expected them to. Joe Rogan liked rooms like this. They stripped things down, took away the performance, left only conversation. Meghan paused just inside the doorway, her hand still near the frame. Harry stepped in beside her, slightly ahead, eyes moving automatically. Corners, cables, cameras, old habits never really disappear. Joe stood and offered a handshake. Easy. Neutral, thanks for coming in. Meghan returned the handshake. Firm, polite, thank you for having us. Harry nodded, appreciate it. No one rushed, no one smiled too much. The moment felt careful, measured. They took their seats. Meghan on one side, Harry next to her, Joe across the table. 3 microphones angled inward. Black arms, thick cables, nothing decorative, everything functional. The red on air light was still off. Joe adjusted his headphones, then looked at them both. I want to say this up front, he said. This is not an ambush. It is a conversation, long form, no edits, no pressure to agree with me. Meghan nodded slowly. That is why we came. Joe raised an eyebrow slightly. Why exactly did you come? Harry answered first. Because short interviews leave no room to breathe, everything becomes a soundbite. Meghan added quietly, and soundbites have done enough damage. Joe accepted that without comment. He had heard variations of it before. From politicians, from athletes, from people who felt misrepresented by the machine that turned speech into ammunition. Behind the glass, the producer lifted a hand. 30 seconds, Joe leaned back. Meghan folded her hands together. Harry straightened slightly in his chair. The red light came on. Joe's voice shifted into its familiar cadence. Calm, grounded, all right everyone, today I am joined by Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Thanks for being here. Meghan smiled politely. Harry nodded. Joe did not jump into controversy. He never did when he wanted people to stay. I want to start somewhere simple, he said. No headlines, no arguments, just reality. How are you both doing right now? Meghan answered carefully, doing well, focused on family, on building something stable. Harry followed, quieter life, different pace, learning as we go. Joe listened, let the words land, let the room settle. He nodded, sounds peaceful. Meghan hesitated for half a second. Peaceful is the goal, she said, not always the reality. Joe noticed the pause, he always did. The conversation stayed light at first. Parenting. Adjusting to life outside the royal structure, living without a schedule dictated by ceremony. Harry spoke about small routines, morning walks, reading, things that sounded ordinary but carried weight coming from him. Joe let it flow. He was patient, but patience was not avoidance. After a few minutes, he leaned forward slightly. You both made a decision that most people will never fully understand, walking away from something that powerful, something that old. Something that comes with expectations most people never face. Harry nodded, we know. Meghan added, we expected confusion, we did not expect hostility. Joe tilted his head, that is interesting, how so? Meghan chose her words carefully. Confusion asks questions. Hostility makes judgments. Joe nodded slowly. Fair distinction. The producer behind the glass watched closely. Meghan was composed, Harry was steady. They were aligned, that mattered. Joe continued. Do you ever feel like you are still explaining yourselves? Harry smiled slightly. Every day. Meghan added, and sometimes explaining makes things worse. Joe chuckled softly, that tracks. Then he shifted, let me ask this. When you agreed to come on today, what did you hope would come out of it? Harry glanced at Meghan, she gave a small nod. Harry spoke. Context, full sentences, time. Joe smiled. Time is the one thing most interviews do not give. Meghan looked at him directly. And the one thing our story has never had. Joe nodded. He let that sit. He was not challenging them yet, he was mapping them. The studio remained quiet except for their voices, no audience reactions. No music, no interruptions. Joe leaned back again. People feel like they know you, that is part of the problem. They think they have the full picture. Meghan's expression tightened slightly. Yes, Joe continued. And when people think they know everything, they stop listening. Harry added, and they stop seeing you as human. Joe nodded. That is something a lot of public figures say. Meghan responded, because it keeps being true. There was no anger in her voice, just fatigue. Joe leaned forward, let me ask about silence. Meghan looked up. You have both talked about how staying silent was not an option, that it caused harm, that it almost broke you. Harry nodded. Joe continued. But silence is often expected of people in powerful systems, especially when tradition is involved. Why do you think silence was so important to them? Meghan answered slowly. Because silence keeps structures intact. Speaking introduces uncertainty. Joe watched her closely. That was not a rehearsed answer. Harry added, silence makes things easier. For everyone except the person carrying the weight. Joe nodded. And when you stopped being silent, everything changed. Meghan's eyes lowered briefly. Yes, Joe did not interrupt. He waited. She continued. The moment you speak, you become the problem, not the behavior, not the system. Joe leaned back. Some people would say that comes with joining something bigger than yourself. Meghan looked up. Her voice remained calm. Belonging should not require erasure. Joe nodded slightly. That sentence mattered. The producer behind the glass scribbled it down. Joe shifted again. There is a criticism that follows you both everywhere. That you left the institution but not the attention. That you criticize it while benefiting from the platform it gave you. Harry leaned forward. Visibility is not the same as seeking attention. Joe nodded. Some people do not see the difference. Meghan answered, because they assume intent. They assume we speak for gain, not survival. Joe looked at her. Survival is a strong word. Meghan met his gaze. It is an accurate one. The room felt heavier now, not hostile but more serious. Joe rested his forearms on the table. Let me ask something that people argue about constantly. Harry and Meghan focused on him fully. Do you think the public owes you understanding? Meghan answered without hesitation. No. Joe raised an eyebrow. No, she shook her head. No one owes us sympathy. But people owe themselves honesty. Joe frowned slightly. Explain that. Meghan spoke carefully. If people choose to judge me, that is their right. But I want that judgment to be based on truth, not caricature. Joe nodded. Some people believe they already are being honest. Meghan's voice stayed even. Then they have not listened. Joe leaned back. He could feel the tension rising, not explosive, controlled, like pressure in a sealed room. He decided to slow things down instead of pushing harder. Let me ask about expectations. Harry nodded. People expected you to adapt completely, to blend in, to follow a script that existed long before you arrived. Meghan nodded. Yes, Joe continued. What happened when you did not? Meghan paused, this time longer. The cost became clear. Joe waited. She continued. There are consequences for disrupting comfort, especially when you are not supposed to be the one doing it. Joe nodded slowly. Harry added quietly, and the cost is rarely paid by the system. It is paid by the individual. The studio went quiet again. Joe glanced briefly at the clock. They had time, plenty of it. He leaned forward one more time. Before we go deeper, I want to ask something directly. Meghan and Harry both looked at him. This conversation is going to get uncomfortable. Questions will feel sharp. People will not like the answers. Some will say you are avoiding accountability. Others will say you are being attacked. Joe paused. Are you prepared for that? Meghan did not look away. Yes, Harry nodded. Yes. Behind the glass, the producer exhaled slowly. Nothing had changed physically. The chairs were in the same place. The microphones hadn't moved. The lighting stayed low and warm, but the conversation had crossed an invisible line. The kind you only notice after you step over it. Joe leaned forward again, elbows resting lightly on the table. His voice stayed calm, almost casual. That was always when his questions carried the most weight. We have talked about silence, he said, about why you chose to speak. I want to talk about responsibility now. Meghan nodded once. Harry stayed still, eyes fixed on Joe. When you have this kind of reach, Joe continued, every word travels further than you intend. Some people believe you are careful with that. Others believe you are selective. How do you decide what gets shared and what stays private? Meghan answered first, measured and steady. We ask whether speaking helps or harms, not us, others. If it only feeds noise, we do not say it. Joe tilted his head slightly. Some would argue it always helps you. Meghan did not bristle. She did not rush. Helping ourselves is not wrong, she said, especially after years of being told our well-being did not matter. Harry nodded. Joe absorbed that, then shifted. There is a phrase that comes up a lot, trauma as currency. People say pain has become part of your public identity, that it is what keeps attention on you. Harry leaned forward now. People confuse openness with exploitation, he said. Speaking about trauma does not mean you are selling it. Joe looked at him closely. Then why does it always seem to come back to the same chapters? Meghan inhaled slowly before answering. Because those chapters changed everything, she said. You do not close a book on something that reshaped your life just because others are tired of hearing about it. Joe nodded. Some people say they are not tired, they are skeptical. Meghan met his gaze. Skepticism requires listening. What we see is dismissal. The producer behind the glass shifted. The tone was tightening, still controlled, but firmer. Joe leaned back slightly. Let me ask about timing. Harry's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. People believe you choose moments carefully, that you speak when attention is highest, that you go quiet when scrutiny increases. Harry frowned. That is not true. Joe did not argue immediately. Then explain how it looks. Meghan answered. It looks like capacity, not strategy. There are moments when we can engage and moments when we cannot. We are not obligated to be available at all times. Joe nodded. Some would say availability comes with influence. Meghan replied evenly, boundaries come with humanity. The room went quiet again. Joe leaned forward. Let us talk about the institution itself. Meghan's shoulders tightened slightly. Harry exhaled slowly. People believe the system you left has existed for generations, Joe said. They believe it has flaws but also stability, tradition, rules. They believe you entered and refused to adapt. Meghan shook her head gently. Adaptation is not erasure, she said. I adapted, I learned, I followed rules. What I would not do was disappear. Joe raised an eyebrow. Disappear how? Meghan's voice lowered. By pretending I was not struggling, by smiling through harm. By letting lies stand because correcting them was inconvenient. Joe listened carefully. Some people would say that is the price of joining something bigger than yourself. Meghan looked at him directly. And some systems survive by charging that price selectively. Harry added quietly, that is where it breaks. Joe nodded. There is another criticism, that you present yourselves as truth-tellers while controlling your own narrative very carefully. Meghan did not deny it. Everyone controls their narrative, she said. The difference is ours is labeled manipulation instead of self-preservation. Joe tilted his head. Self-preservation can look like avoidance. Meghan replied. Or like survival. Joe leaned back again. Let me be blunt. Harry and Meghan both focused on him. People believe you want empathy without accountability, that you frame yourselves as morally right while pushing blame outward. The silence that followed was heavy. Harry spoke first. Life is not a courtroom, he said. Accountability is not public punishment. Joe nodded. Then what is it? Meghan answered quietly. Reflection, repair, growth, not spectacle. Joe looked at her, but the public never sees that part. Meghan met his gaze. Not everything meaningful is visible. The producer scribbled notes. The conversation was no longer theoretical. It was personal now. Joe shifted his weight. Let us talk about your marriage. Harry straightened. Meghan's hands tightened together. People believe your relationship is the center of every decision, Joe said. That Harry followed you out, that you lead and he supports. Meghan's voice stayed calm. Harry is not led, he is not controlled. He is my partner. Joe turned to Harry. Do you agree? Harry answered immediately, completely. Joe nodded. But you understand why people question it. Harry's eyes narrowed slightly. People question strong women and loyal men all the time. Joe accepted that. Fair. He turned back to Meghan. Do you feel blamed for his choices? Meghan hesitated just for a moment. Yes, she said. Often, Joe asked softly. How does that feel? Meghan inhaled, like being punished for loving someone openly. Joe leaned back. Some people say you thrive in conflict. Meghan looked up sharply. No, she said firmly, I endure it. Joe held her gaze. But conflict follows you. Meghan leaned forward. Conflict follows truth in systems built on silence. Harry added, especially when truth disrupts comfort. The room went quiet again. Joe rested his arms on the table. Let me ask something direct. Do you believe the public owes you understanding? Meghan answered without hesitation. No. Joe raised his eyebrows. No, she shook her head. No one owes a sympathy, but people owe themselves honesty. Joe frowned slightly. Explain that. Meghan spoke slowly. If people choose to judge me, that is their right. But I want that judgment to be based on reality, not caricature. Joe nodded. Some believe they already are. Meghan replied evenly. Then they have not listened. Joe leaned back again. The pressure was building now, not explosive but undeniable. He decided to go closer to the edge. There is a belief that you speak when it benefits you and stay quiet when it does not, that you frame harm carefully, that you avoid criticism. Harry frowned. That belief exists because people want a simple story. Meghan added. Heroes or villains, nothing in between. Joe nodded. And where do you think you fall? Meghan answered quietly. In between. Joe leaned forward, but people struggle to see that. Meghan met his gaze. That is not my responsibility. The producer behind the glass whispered. This is tightening fast. Joe felt it too. He chose his next words carefully. If your story is about healing, Joe said, why does it leave so many people angry? Meghan closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, her expression had changed. Because healing unsettles people who were comfortable with silence. Harry looked at Joe. And because truth feels like accusation to those who do not want to examine themselves. The room fell still. Joe leaned back slowly. All right, he said, that is where this gets difficult. He paused, because now we are no longer talking about stories, we are talking about impact. The shift happened quietly, no raised voices. No sudden movement, just a change in gravity that everyone in the room felt at the same time. Joe felt it in the way Meghan stopped nodding. Harry felt it in the way his jaw tightened without him realizing it. The producer behind the glass felt it when the air stopped feeling conversational and started feeling consequential. Joe leaned forward again. His tone stayed even, almost gentle. That was when it was most dangerous. We have talked about intention, he said, about truth, about survival. I want to talk about impact now, not what you meant, what actually happened. Meghan did not answer immediately. She stayed still. Listening, Joe continued. When you speak, people react, families react, institutions react, individuals react, some feel validated, others feel attacked, some feel betrayed. Do you think enough about the damage your words cause? Harry leaned forward before Meghan could respond. We think about it constantly, he said. That is why this is not easy for us. Joe nodded but did not let go. Then why does it keep happening? The silence that followed stretched longer than before. Meghan inhaled slowly. Because the damage did not start with us, she said, and it will not end by pretending it did. Joe watched her carefully. But your words reopened wounds. Meghan lifted her eyes, wounds that were never treated. Joe leaned back slightly. For some people, treatment looks like restraint. Meghan shook her head. For some people, restraint looks like control. The producer shifted in his seat. This was the line, the place where perspective hardens into opposition. Joe leaned forward again. Let me put it another way. Harry and Meghan both focused fully on him. Some people believe you use language very carefully. That you frame everything through harm and healing in a way that leaves no room for disagreement. That if someone challenges you, they are labeled cruel or complicit. Meghan's eyes narrowed slightly. That is not true. Joe did not flinch. Then why does criticism feel so unwelcome? Meghan's voice stayed calm. But something underneath it had changed. Because most criticism is not about curiosity. It is about punishment. Joe tilted his head. Punishment for what? Meghan answered without hesitation. For refusing to stay quiet. Harry nodded. Joe looked at Harry. Do you see it the same way? Harry answered slowly. I see a system that taught me silence was duty, and I see what happened when we broke it. Joe leaned back. Some would say silence is part of leadership. Harry met his gaze. Some would say silence is part of complicity. The room tightened further. Joe adjusted his posture. Let me ask something directly, he said. No framing, no theory. Harry and Meghan both leaned in slightly. Do you take responsibility for anything that went wrong after you left? Meghan froze for half a second, just long enough for the cameras to catch it. Yes, she said finally. I take responsibility for choosing myself. Joe waited. And for anything else? Meghan held his gaze. I take responsibility for speaking honestly. I do not take responsibility for how others weaponized that honesty. Joe nodded. So nothing was mishandled, Harry interjected. That is not what she said. Joe turned to him. Then what did go wrong? Harry took a breath. We underestimated how much people needed us to remain silent to feel comfortable. Joe leaned back. That sounds like blame outward. Harry's jaw tightened. That sounds like truth. The air grew heavier. Meghan shifted in her seat. Joe leaned forward again. Here is what people struggle with. You say the system harmed you. You say the press lied. You say silence nearly destroyed you. But you also say you are healed, that you have moved on. Those two things do not sit easily together. Meghan's lips pressed together. Healing is not an endpoint, she said. It is a process. Joe nodded. Then why does it feel like you are still fighting? Meghan leaned forward now, her voice lowered. Because the fight never stopped. Joe held her gaze. Or because the fight keeps you relevant. The room went completely still. The producer behind the glass froze. No one spoke. No one moved. Meghan stared at Joe. Her composure did not break immediately. That made it more unsettling. Say that again, she said quietly. Joe did not back away. People believe the conflict keeps attention on you, that without it, interest fades. That pain has become part of your public identity. Harry straightened sharply. That is not fair. Joe turned to him. It is not about fair. It is about perception. Meghan's voice tightened. You think I talk about pain for attention? Joe answered calmly. I think people watching think that. Meghan leaned forward. Then those people do not understand what it costs to speak at all. Joe leaned back slightly. Then help them understand. Meghan's eyes flashed. By doing what? Apologizing for surviving, performing gratitude for harm, pretending none of it mattered. Joe shook his head. That is not what I am asking. Meghan raised her hand slightly. Then what are you asking? Joe paused. I am asking whether you ever consider that the chaos follows you because you keep inviting it into the room. The sentence landed hard. Harry turned toward Joe. That is not fair. Joe did not look away. I am asking the question people ask privately. Meghan's composure cracked, not loudly, not explosively, but visibly. You invited me here to talk, she said, not to diagnose me. Joe responded evenly. I am not diagnosing, I am questioning patterns. Meghan's voice dropped further. Patterns require distance. You are inside this with me. Joe raised an eyebrow. Then why does every major moment lead back to confrontation? Meghan pushed her chair back slightly, not standing yet, but the sound was unmistakable, because confrontation happens when people refuse to listen. Joe leaned forward. Or when people refuse to accept criticism. Meghan stood, not abruptly, not dramatically. Calmly, deliberately, Harry rose with her instinctively. The producer behind the glass whispered, Here it is. Meghan did not look at the cameras. She looked at Joe. This is no longer a conversation, she said. This is an interrogation. Joe remained seated. I am asking what people want to know. Meghan shook her head. You are asking questions designed to corner me. To reduce my life to a theory about relevance. Joe replied, you agreed to hard questions. Meghan's voice tightened. Hard questions are not the same as disrespect. Joe inhaled. I am not disrespecting you. Meghan's eyes glistened slightly. You are questioning the legitimacy of my pain. Joe paused. I am questioning how it is framed. Meghan exhaled sharply, and that is the problem. She looked toward the producer, then back to Joe. I came here to speak honestly. I stayed through discomfort. I answered questions I did not enjoy, but I will not sit here while my trauma is treated like strategy. Joe leaned back. Then where is the line? Meghan answered without hesitation, right here. She stepped back from the table. Harry placed a hand lightly on her arm. Meghan, we can pause, Joe said. She shook her head. Pausing does not change the direction of this conversation. Joe stood slowly. Now, we can reset. Meghan looked at him. You already decided what this was. Silence fell again, heavy, final. Meghan reached for her headphones and removed them carefully. She placed them on the table. I am done, she said, quiet, controlled. Joe did not interrupt. Harry removed his headphones as well. Thank you for your time, Meghan said. Then she turned. The door opened, closed. The red light remained on. The room felt hollow. Joe stood still for a moment, eyes fixed on the table. Behind the glass, the producer whispered, that is it. Joe exhaled slowly. Yeah. The feed continued for several seconds before anyone moved. The confrontation was over. The fallout was just beginning. The door did not slam. That was the detail most people would miss later, when clips began circulating, when headlines used words like explosion and meltdown and chaos. None of those words matched the sound the door actually made. It closed softly, controlled. Final. Inside the studio, no one spoke. Joe remained standing for a moment, one hand resting on the edge of the table. His headphones were still on. The microphones were still live. The red on air light still glowed above the door, indifferent to what had just happened beneath it. Behind the glass, the producer did not move. Neither did the assistant. They all understood instinctively that this was not a moment to rush. Silence here mattered. Joe finally reached up and removed his headphones. He placed them on the table carefully, as if any sudden movement might fracture something already fragile. Well, he said quietly. No one replied. He looked toward the door again. Then down at the empty chair Meghan had occupied only seconds earlier. The chair was still angled slightly away from the table from where she had stood, a small detail, a visual marker of departure. Joe sat back down. He did not look triumphant. He did not look rattled. He looked thoughtful. And that more than anything unsettled the crew. This was not the aftermath of a shouting match. This was the aftermath of a boundary being crossed and enforced. The producer finally leaned toward the talkback. We are clear, he said softly. Feed is still rolling, but we can cut whenever you want. Joe nodded once. Give me a minute. Outside the studio, the hallway felt longer than it had before. Meghan walked steadily, her pace even, her posture upright. Harry stayed close beside her, not leading, not following, just there. Neither of them spoke. Their footsteps echoed faintly against the concrete floor. The building was quiet. No press, no crowd, just the hum of ventilation and the distant sound of someone typing in an office they would never see. At the end of the hallway, the exit door waited. Meghan stopped for half a second, not because she was unsure, because she was taking inventory of herself. Breath steady, hands calm, chest tight but manageable. Harry looked at her. You all right? She nodded. I am now. They stepped outside into cooler air. The late afternoon light felt harsh after the dim studio. Meghan blinked once, then adjusted. The car was already waiting. No scramble, no rush. This part had been planned. She slid into the back seat and leaned her head briefly against the window. Harry followed and closed the door behind them. As the car pulled away, Meghan exhaled, a long breath. One she had been holding since the first sharp turn in the conversation. I knew it would get hard, she said quietly. I did not expect it to turn like that. Harry nodded. He stopped listening. She closed her eyes. No, he stopped hearing. Back inside the studio, Joe finally leaned toward the mic again. The red light was still on. He did not ask the producer to turn it off. All right, he said, voice calm. We are going to end it here. He paused. That conversation went somewhere neither side fully expected. Emotions were real. Tensions were real. Meghan chose to leave. That was her right. He stopped again, choosing words with more care than before. You do not have to agree with her. You do not have to like her. But what you saw was not acting. It was a line being drawn. The red light went off. In the control room, the producer leaned back in his chair. That is going to be everywhere, he said. The assistant nodded. Everywhere. They were already scrubbing the footage, marking timestamps. Identifying the moment Meghan stood, the pause before it, the question that triggered it, the quiet firmness in her voice when she said she was done. They debated which angle to use, wide shot, close up. Reaction shot of Joe. Reaction shot of Harry rising with her. Each choice would tell a different story. The executive producer stepped in. We show context, she said, enough to cover ourselves, but the moment is the moment. They all knew what that meant. The clip would not be gentle. In the hours that followed, the video went live. Joe Rogan puts Harry and Meghan on the spot on air. Fallout explodes. The numbers climbed fast, faster than usual. Comments flooded in faster than the moderators could read them. Some praised Meghan for walking out, for refusing to be cornered, for holding her ground. Others accused her of running, of being unable to handle criticism, of proving every negative assumption right. Harry became part of the debate too. Loyal, controlled, silent. Some admired him for standing with her, others mocked him for doing so. Joe trended as well. Some applauded him for asking hard questions. Others said he crossed a line, that he pushed too far, that he turned curiosity into confrontation. In truth, everyone saw what they already believed. That was always the way it went. Later that evening, Meghan sat on the edge of a bed in a quiet house far from the studio. The room was dim. No cameras, no microphones. Just the soft hum of a lamp and the distant sound of Harry moving through the hallway. Her phone lay face down beside her. She did not need to read the headlines to know them. She had lived this pattern before. Speak, be questioned, be reduced, be judged. Harry stepped into the room and sat beside her. Do you regret going? He asked. She thought for a moment. No, she said. I regret that it proved what I already knew. He nodded. That there is no safe room. She met his eyes. Not yet. Back in the studio, Joe watched the clip once. Just once. He did not replay it obsessively. He did not scan comments. He did not argue with critics online. He sat quietly and thought about the moment where the conversation turned, the exact sentence, the tone he used. The look on Meghan's face when she realized the questions were no longer about understanding. He knew he could defend himself easily. He had asked what people thought. He had done his job. He had not yelled. He had not insulted. He had not raised his voice. All of that was true. And yet, there was another truth beneath it, that sometimes asking the hardest question is not the same as asking the right one. In the days that followed, panels debated the walkout. Psychologists analyzed body language. Commentators framed it as strength or weakness depending on their angle, but the people who truly paid attention noticed something else. Meghan did not raise her voice. She did not insult Joe. She did not storm out in anger. She stood, she named the shift, she left. That detail mattered. For some viewers, especially older women watching from quiet living rooms, that moment landed differently. They did not see a meltdown. They saw something familiar. The moment when a conversation stops being about listening and becomes about endurance. The moment when staying costs more than leaving. One woman would later comment beneath the video. She did what I wish I had done years ago. She got up. That comment would not go viral. It would not be quoted in articles, but it would be read and reread and quietly understood. Meghan would not respond publicly to the fallout. No statement, no clarification, no damage control. That silence was deliberate, not the silence that erased her. The silence that protected her. Harry would speak once, briefly, to a friend off record. She drew a line, he said, that is all. Weeks later, the clip would still circulate, still be debated, still be used as evidence by both sides of an argument that had existed long before that studio. But for Meghan, the moment had already settled into something else. Not victory, not defeat, resolution. She had entered the room open. She had stayed while it was uncomfortable. She had left when it became something else. And that choice mattered more than any headline. The world would remember the walkout. She would remember the clarity. And somewhere between those two truths, the real story would live quietly, unedited, unframed, untitled, just a woman standing up and walking out.